I used to think being the dependable one was something to be proud of. In my family, I was the person everyone called when something went wrong. If someone needed help moving, I showed up early. If someone needed money, I figured something out. If there was tension at family dinners, I was the one trying to calm everyone down. It wasn't something I questioned. It just felt normal. Families help each other. That was the rule I lived by. My older sister Rachel was the opposite of me. She was loud, confident, and somehow always at the center of attention. My parents admired her energy, even when it got her into trouble. When she made mistakes, people laughed and said that was just her personality. When I made mistakes, they became lessons about responsibility. I learned early that being reliable earned approval, so I leaned into it. I became the safe choice, the stable one, the person people expected to say yes. Over the years, that role became automatic. Birthdays, holidays, random. Emergencies, I was always there. I drove my parents to appointments, helped Rachel when rent was late, watched my nephew when she needed a break. Nobody even asked carefully anymore because they already knew my answer. Yes. I didn't realize how heavy that role had become until the night everything changed. It was a regular Sunday dinner at my parents' house. Nothing special. Just the usual noise. Plates clinking, conversations overlapping. I remember feeling tired but comfortable, like I was exactly where I belonged. Halfway through dinner, Rachel sighed dramatically and said she was going through a rough time. She talked about work stress, bills piling up, how everything felt overwhelming. I listened quietly, already sensing where this conversation was heading. She looked directly at me when she said she didn't know what she was going to do. My father turned toward me almost automatically. My mother stayed quiet, but watched me closely. That familiar pressure settled on my shoulders. Rachel smiled slightly and said, "You've helped me before. I just need a little support until things stabilize." I asked how much she needed. When she said the number, my stomach tightened. It wasn't small. I had savings, yes, but they were meant for my own plans. Things I had postponed for years because someone else always needed something first. For the first time, I hesitated. I tried to explain that things were tight for me too, that I had expenses coming up. But before I finished, Rachel laughed. "Come on," she said. "You're the responsible one. You'll be fine." Everyone smiled like it was obvious. Like my money wasn't really mine, just a resource waiting to be used when the family needed it. Something inside me pushed back. I took a breath and said quietly, "I can't this time." The room went silent. My mother blinked. My father frowned. Rachel stared at me like she didn't understand what she had heard. "What do you mean you can't?" she asked. "I just can't," I said again. "Not right now." Her expression changed instantly. The warmth disappeared. "Wow," she said, leaning back. "I didn't expect that from you." My mother sighed softly and said, "Family helps family." I felt my face grow warm. I wanted to explain that I had helped for years, that this wasn't about not caring. But the words felt heavy in my throat. Rachel shook her head. "I guess I know where I stand now." That hurt more than I expected. Dinner continued, but everything felt different. Conversations moved around me instead of including me. I felt like a stranger sitting at the same table I'd sat at my whole life. When I left that night, my mother hugged me, but whispered, "I hope you think about this." I drove home replaying the moment again and again. I had only said no once. That was all. The next morning my phone was quiet. No messages in the family group chat. No random memes from Rachel. Nothing. At first, I thought everyone just needed time to cool off. Then messages started coming from relatives I hadn't talked to in weeks. "I heard you wouldn't help your sister. She's really struggling. Family should come first." I stared at my phone in disbelief. How did everyone already know? And why did it sound like I had done something terrible? That's when I realized someone had told the story, and it wasn't me. Over the next few days, the silence from my immediate family grew heavier. Calls stopped. Invitations disappeared. I tried not to overthink it, but it felt like I had crossed an invisible line. One evening, I saw a post Rachel made online about fake support and people who disappear when you need them most. She didn't mention my name, but the comments were full of sympathy from family members. My chest tightened. After everything I had done, this was how it looked. That night, I sat alone on my couch thinking about all the times I said yes without hesitation. The late-night drives. The money I never got back. The plans I postponed because someone else needed something. And for the first time, I asked myself a question I had never really considered. What happens when the person who always helps finally says no? I didn't know it yet, but that one decision was about to change how my entire family saw me. The days after that dinner felt heavier than I expected. It wasn't just the silence, it was the feeling that something had shifted and I wasn't allowed to understand why. Messages in the family group chat slowed down whenever I replied. Plans were made without me. Even small things felt different. Like my mother posting pictures from a family lunch I hadn't been invited to. I kept telling myself I was overthinking it, but deep down I knew I wasn't. A week later, my mother called. Her voice sounded polite, almost formal, like she was talking to someone she didn't know well anymore. She said everyone was coming over again on Sunday and that I should be there. I agreed because I wanted a chance to clear the air. I assumed someone would finally ask my side of the story. When I walked into my parents' house that Sunday, the atmosphere felt off. Conversations lowered when I entered. People smiled, but it felt forced. Rachel was sitting at the table laughing with my cousins, relaxed and comfortable. She barely looked at me. Dinner started normally, but it didn't take long for the tension to surface. My aunt mentioned how hard things had been for Rachel lately. Someone else said it was sad when family didn't support each other. I stayed quiet, waiting for someone to actually talk to me instead of about me. Finally, my father cleared his throat. "We just don't understand why you reacted like that," he said. I frowned. Reacted how? He looked surprised. "Refusing to help your sister when she needed you." My chest tightened. I tried to explain that it wasn't about not caring, that I just couldn't afford it right now. But Rachel interrupted. "You didn't even try," she said. "You just said no?" A few people nodded. Felt my stomach drop. That was the moment I realized this wasn't a conversation. It was a judgment. They weren't trying to understand me. They were confirming a version of the story they already believed. My mother sighed and said she thought I valued family more than that. Those words hurt more than anything else. I wanted to remind her of every time I had said yes, every favor, every sacrifice. But suddenly, it felt pointless. After dinner, I overheard my cousin whispering in the kitchen that maybe I had changed, that maybe I thought I was better than everyone now. I stood there frozen for a second, realizing how far the story had spread. I left early that night, saying I had work in the morning. Nobody tried to stop me. The drive home felt long and quiet. I kept replaying the evening in my head, trying to understand how one no had turned into this version of me that felt completely unfamiliar. The following weeks got worse. Family group chats went silent whenever I spoke. Photos appeared online of gatherings I wasn't invited to. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just small moments that made it clear I was being pushed to the outside. One evening I saw a post Rachel made with the caption, "Some people only care when it's convenient." The comments were full of support. Even my aunt left a heart emoji. I stared at my phone, feeling something inside me sink. Then came the moment that changed everything. I ran into my uncle at a grocery store. He smiled politely and asked how I was doing, but his tone felt awkward. After a moment, he said, I hope you and Rachel work things out. She's been really hurt. I blinked. Hurt? He explained that Rachel had told everyone she was close to losing her apartment and that I refused to help even though I could easily afford it. He said she felt abandoned. My stomach dropped. That wasn't true. She never said she was about to lose her apartment. And she had no idea what my finances looked like. Suddenly, everything made sense. They were reacting to a story Rachel told. I drove home angry, gripping the steering wheel harder than usual. For the first time, I felt something stronger than guilt. I felt betrayed. Not just by Rachel, but by everyone who believed her without asking me. That night, I sat on my couch staring at my phone, thinking about calling someone to explain, but who would listen? They had already chosen what to believe. A few days later, my mother called again. She said Rachel was having a hard time and that maybe I should apologize so the family could move forward. Apologize. I felt something inside me snap. I told her I needed space. She went quiet and then said, "I don't recognize you anymore." That sentence stayed with me long after the call ended. I started pulling back after that. Not out of anger, out of exhaustion. I stopped replying immediately to messages. I stopped volunteering help. I focused on work, on my own life, on things that didn't revolve around fixing someone else's problems. And strangely, it felt peaceful. But the more distance I created, the more they painted me as the problem. One evening, I received a long message from Rachel. She said she couldn't believe I was letting money ruin the family, that everyone was disappointed in me, that I needed to make things right. I read it 3 times. She wasn't asking for understanding. She was demanding that I return to my old role. That's when something clicked. This wasn't about one moment at dinner. This was about years of expectations I had quietly accepted. I didn't reply. The next morning, my phone exploded with messages from cousins, aunts, and even family friends talking about forgiveness and unity. It felt coordinated, like a wave pushing me back into place. I sat there holding my phone, feeling strangely calm. Because for the first time, I saw the pattern clearly. As long as I was useful, I was loved. The moment I set a boundary, I became selfish. And deep down, I knew this wasn't over yet. Something was coming, and I could feel it. The strange thing about distance is that it gives you space to think. Once I stopped reacting to every message and every guilty comment, I started seeing things more clearly. My days felt quieter. I focused on work, went for long walks after dinner, spent evenings doing things I had ignored for years. For the first time in a long while, my life didn't revolve around fixing someone else's problems. But peace didn't last long. The more I stepped back, the more pressure came from my family. Missed calls turned into long voice messages. Casual check-ins became lectures about loyalty and forgiveness. It felt like everyone was waiting for me to return to being the person who always said yes. One afternoon, my mother showed up at my apartment without warning. When I opened the door, I could see disappointment written all over her face. She walked inside slowly, looking around like she didn't recognize my life. "Anymore?" she said. "Everyone was worried about me, that I was isolating myself, that this wasn't like me." I almost laughed because what she really meant was that I wasn't available anymore. She sat down and told me Rachel was struggling emotionally and felt abandoned by me. I listened quietly, then asked a simple question. "Did anyone ask why I said no?" My mother paused, clearly caught off guard. After a moment she said, "It doesn't matter. Family helps family." That was her answer. No curiosity. No interest in my side. Just expectation. After she left, I sat in silence for a long time. I realized this wasn't just about Rachel. It was about the role I had always played, the dependable one who made things easier for everyone else. A few days later, something happened that changed everything. A friend sent me a screenshot from social media. It was a post Rachel had written about betrayal and fake support. She didn't mention me by name, but the details were obvious enough that anyone who knew us would understand. The comments were full of sympathy. People calling her strong. People saying she deserved better. Some of those comments were from family. I felt anger rise in my chest. She was turning a private situation into a public story, and everyone was cheering her on. That night, I met my friend Megan for coffee. She wasn't connected to my family, which made it easier to talk honestly. I told her everything, the dinner, the messages, the way everyone had turned against me. She listened quietly and then asked something simple. Has Rachel ever paid you back when you helped her? I thought about it. The rent money, the emergency loans, the favors that stretched into months? No, I said. Megan nodded slowly. Maybe they're just used to you fixing things. That sentence stayed with me. A few days later, my cousin Olivia called me. We weren't especially close, so I was surprised. She sounded nervous and asked if we could meet. When we sat down at a small cafe, she looked uncomfortable, like she wasn't sure she should be there. She said she felt bad about how things were going and that she didn't think everyone knew the full story. Apparently, Rachel had been telling people that I refused to help even though I had plenty of money, that I embarrassed her in front of the family, and that I acted like I was better than everyone. My jaw tightened. None of that was true. Olivia hesitated before adding something else. She said Rachel had been asking other relatives for. I left that conversation feeling both relieved and angry. Relieved that someone finally saw what was happening. Angry that it took so long. For the first time, I considered defending myself publicly. Posting my side, sending messages, explaining the truth. But another part of me felt tired. I didn't want to fight for people to believe me. I wanted them to care enough to ask. Then, something unexpected happened. My father called late one night. He rarely called, just to talk, so I knew something was wrong. His voice sounded tense. He asked if I knew anything about Rachel's financial situation. I said no. There was a long silence before he admitted she had asked him for a large amount of money, too. He sounded confused, like something wasn't adding up anymore. Before hanging up, he said quietly, maybe we didn't get the full picture. It wasn't an apology, but it was the first sign that doubt was spreading. Over the next week, small things started changing. Messages from relatives felt less judgmental. My aunt sent a short text asking how I was doing. My cousin reacted to one of my posts again. The tension didn't disappear, but it softened. It felt like the story Rachel told was starting to unravel on its own. Then I got a message from Rachel. This time, it wasn't angry. It was short and strangely polite. She asked if we could talk privately. I stared at the message for a long time before agreeing. We met at a quiet park. She looked tired, less confident than usual. For a while she talked about stress and misunderstandings, avoiding eye contact. Then she admitted she might have exaggerated when talking. To the family, because she felt embarrassed. Exaggerated. That was her word for weeks of turning everyone against me. I asked why she didn't just tell the truth. She shrugged and said she needed support. That answer told me everything. It wasn't about honesty. It was about control. Then she asked if I could help her now, just once, to fix things. I almost laughed at the irony. Even after everything, she still expected me to step back into the same role. I looked at her and realized something surprising. I wasn't angry anymore. I just felt clear. I told her no again, calmly. Her expression hardened for a second, then softened into resignation. We left without hugging. That night my mother texted me saying she had spoken with Rachel and that maybe there had been misunderstandings. I read that word over and over. It felt like a quiet attempt to move on without admitting anyone was wrong. Still, it was the first real sign that the truth was coming out. And deep down, I knew one more conversation was coming, the one that would decide whether anything between us could actually change. The week after I met Rachel felt strangely quiet. The tension that had been hanging over everything for months didn't disappear, but it softened. Messages from nobody blamed me openly anymore, but nobody apologized either. It felt like everyone wanted to move forward without talking about what had actually happened. Part of me wanted to accept that, pretend everything was fine and go back to normal. But another part knew that if I did, nothing would really change. A few days later, my mother called and said the family was having dinner on Sunday. Her voice sounded softer than usual. She said everyone missed me and hoped I would come. I hesitated. The last time I sat at that table, I felt like a stranger. But something inside me said this moment mattered not because I needed their approval, but because I needed closure. When I arrived, the atmosphere felt different, quieter. People greeted me with careful smiles, like they weren't sure what was safe to say. Rachel was already there, avoiding eye contact. My father nodded at me in a way that felt almost respectful. We sat down, and for a while the conversation stayed light: work, weather, small jokes. Everyone seemed nervous. Eventually, my mother took a deep breath and said she thought we should talk openly. The room went silent. She said families go through hard moments and that maybe people misunderstood each other. I noticed how carefully she avoided saying anyone was wrong. My father looked at me and said, "Maybe we expected too much from you." The words surprised me. It wasn't a full apology, but it was honest enough to make my shoulders relax. Slightly. I took a breath and spoke calmly. I said I loved them, but loving someone didn't mean always saying yes. I explained that I had spent years trying to keep peace, trying to be dependable, and that I didn't realize how much pressure that created until the moment I finally said no. I told them how it felt to be judged without anyone asking my side. The room stayed quiet while I spoke. Nobody interrupted. My mother's eyes filled with tears. She said she never meant to make me feel used. Rachel looked down at her plate for a long moment before finally speaking. She admitted she had handled things badly. She said she felt embarrassed and scared, and that she told the story in a way that made her look better. Hearing her say it out loud felt strange. Not satisfying, just clear. For weeks, I had questioned myself, wondering if I had done something wrong. In that moment, I realized I hadn't, and something unexpected happened. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel the need to win. I just felt calm. Dinner slowly returned to normal conversation. People started laughing again. But I noticed something important. Nobody looked at me expecting me to fix anything. Nobody asked me for help. I was just another person at the table, not the problem solver, not the safety net. After dinner, my father pulled me aside. He said he was proud of me for speaking honestly. That sentence hit me harder than I expected. Growing up, I always felt like approval came from being useful. Hearing those words, without having done anything for anyone, felt different. As I was leaving, Rachel walked me to the door. She apologized again, quieter this time. She said she didn't realize how much pressure she had put on me over the years. I nodded, but didn't rush to make her feel better. The old version of me would have immediately said everything was fine. This time I just said, "I hope we both learn from this." It felt honest. Driving home, I thought about how different everything felt. Compared to that first night when I said no, back then I felt guilty and scared, like I had broken something important. Now I understood that saying no didn't break anything. It revealed what was already fragile. Over the next few weeks, things didn't magically become perfect. Some family members were still distant. Some conversations felt awkward. But something important had changed inside me. I stopped feeling responsible for everyone's happiness. I stopped jumping in to solve problems that weren't mine. And strangely, the more boundaries I set, the more respect I started receiving. One evening, my mother called just to talk. No requests, no pressure. We laughed about small things, And for the first time in a long time, the conversation felt easy. Before hanging up, she said she admired how strong I had been through everything. Hearing that made me realize how much had shifted, not just in them, but in me. Looking back, the moment they called me selfish wasn't the moment everything. I finally understood that love without boundaries turns into expectation, and expectation quietly turns into resentment. Saying no forced everyone, including me, to see the truth. And the biggest surprise was this. Once I stopped trying to hold everything together, nothing actually collapsed. People adjusted. Relationships changed. I changed. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if I had said yes that night. Maybe things would have stayed comfortable. Maybe everyone would have kept smiling. But I would still be carrying the weight of being the person who always sacrificed their own needs. Instead, I learned something different. They called me selfish after everything I did for them, but saying no was the first time I actually chose myself. And for the first time in my life, that felt right. The weeks after that dinner were quieter than I expected. Not perfect, not magical, just calm. The kind of calm that comes when my family didn't suddenly become different people overnight, and I didn't suddenly become fearless. But something had shifted. The tension that used to sit in my chest every time my phone rang was gone. At first, I kept waiting for things to go back to the way they were. For someone to ask me for money again. For Rachel to fall into another crisis and expect me to step in automatically. But it didn't happen right away. Conversations felt lighter. Shorter, more normal. And for the first time, I noticed something strange. I had space. Space in my schedule. Space in my thoughts. Space in my life. I started doing things I had postponed for years. Small things, like going to the gym after work instead of rushing to help someone. Bigger things, like planning a trip I had always talked myself out of because it never felt like the right time. I realized how much of my life had been shaped around being available for everyone else. One evening, Rachel texted me, not to ask for anything, just to say she hoped I was doing well. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. It felt different, lighter. There wasn't that familiar pressure hiding underneath her words. We started talking occasionally after that. Nothing deep at first. Just small updates. I noticed she was more careful with how she spoke to me. Like she was testing new boundaries she didn't fully understand yet. My parents changed too, slowly. My mother stopped hinting that I should help more. My father started asking how I was doing instead of what I was doing for everyone else. These were small changes, almost invisible, but they mattered. Still, not everything felt comfortable. Some relatives kept their distance. A few never reached out again. At first, that hurt. But the longer time passed, the more I realized something important. Not every relationship survives change, and that's okay. One afternoon I ran into my aunt at a cafe. She smiled warmly and said it was good to see me. There was a pause before she added, "You seem different. Happier." I thought about that for a second. Happier wasn't exactly the word. Lighter, maybe? More honest? Yeah, I said. I think I finally learned how to breathe. She laughed softly, but I wasn't joking. The biggest change wasn't in my family. It was inside me. I stopped feeling guilty for saying no. I stopped rehearsing explanations in my head every time I made a decision that only benefited me. I stopped measuring my worth by how useful I was. And the strange thing was, the more I respected my own boundaries, the more other people did too. A few months later, Rachel asked if we could talk. We met for coffee, and she looked nervous. She said she had been trying to handle things differently, that she realized she had relied on me too much. She admitted she didn't know how to ask for help without turning it into pressure. It wasn't a dramatic apology. It was awkward and imperfect, but it was real. I told her I wasn't angry anymore. I just needed things to be different moving forward. She nodded, and for the first time in years, It felt like we were talking as equals instead of roles we had been assigned. When we left, I felt something close to peace. Life didn't suddenly become easy after that. There were still moments where old habits tried to creep back in, times when I felt tempted to say yes just to avoid discomfort. But now I noticed it, and that awareness made all the difference. One evening, I sat alone on my balcony watching the city lights, thinking about how everything started with one simple word: no. It amazed me how much power that word had. Not because it destroyed anything, but because it revealed everything that had been hidden underneath years of quiet expectations. I realized something else too. My family hadn't changed overnight. The situation forced all of us to look at patterns we never questioned before. Some people adapted, some didn't, but I couldn't control that. It made me honest. I thought back to that first dinner, the silence, the disappointment, the feeling that I had done something wrong. If I could go back and talk to that version of myself, I'd tell them this: the moment you stop carrying everyone else is the moment you find out who you really are. And maybe that's why the quiet felt so different now. It wasn't empty. It was peaceful. We talked about ordinary things, recipes, weather, a movie she watched. Before hanging up, she said, "I'm proud of you, you know?" This time, I didn't feel like I had to earn those words. I just said thank you. After the call, I sat there smiling quietly, realizing how far things had come. Not perfect, not dramatic, just real. Looking back, being called selfish hurt more than I expected. But in a strange way, it gave me something I didn't know I was missing: permission to choose myself. They called me selfish after everything I did for them. But now I understood something I hadn't before. You can love your family and still have boundaries. You can care deeply without sacrificing yourself. And sometimes the people who truly love you learn to respect you only after you stop saying yes to everything. The person I was before that dinner thought being dependable meant never saying no. The person I am now knows better. And for the first time in my life, I don't feel guilty about that.